Let's get started on part 1 of Module 7, Managing Virtual Machines. To review for Module 3, there are 3 steps in creating a virtual machine. 1, create the virtual machine, meaning you go to the vSphere client, right-click and select Create Virtual Machine. Allocate it a certain amount of RAM, allocate it a certain number of CPUs, and allocate it hard disk space. Then you install the guest operating system, such as Windows Server. Then you configure the guest operating system, such as give it a computer name, maybe assign it an IP address. And then you install VM tools. And that's a review for Module 3. Create the VM, install the guest operating system, configure the guest operating system, install VM tools. Let's go to the next step now, which is virtual machine management. We have 5 lessons in this section: creating templates and clones, modifying virtual machines, migrating virtual machines, creating virtual machine snapshots, and creating vApps and removing a virtual machine. Understanding virtual machine files. What does it mean to copy or move a file? I think everybody knows what it means to copy a file or what it means to move a file. Well, keep in mind that the virtual machine and the virtual hard disk is a file. If you go to the vSphere client, you go to the data store and you right-click and you select Browse Data Store, you will see for a virtual machine, the virtual hard disk is a single file with a .vmdk extension, and the virtual machine has a .vmx extension. Virtual machine, virtual hard disk are 2 files. So if you understand what it means to copy or move a file, then you will understand the simplicity of creating and moving and cloning and migrating virtual machines. So let's go to Lesson 1, creating templates and clones. What is a template? A template is a master image of a virtual machine that can be used to create new virtual machines. This image typically includes an operating system, applications, and configuration settings for the virtual machine. Use templates to create virtual machines by deploying the template as a virtual machine. So here's the situation. You have created a virtual machine and you've installed the guest operating system of the virtual machine and you've got it configured just right. And now you want to create a whole bunch of other virtual machines which are configured the same way with the same operating system, and you want them to all be the same, except of course they have to have different computer names. That's the purpose of a template. A template allows us to make a copy of an existing virtual machine, but it removes variables which must be different, such as computer name. And if you know Microsoft Windows, you know the program sysprep is used to remove variables which must be unique, such as computer name. So to create a template, we go to the machine we want to make a template of, in this case, the accounting server. I right-click on it, I select Template, and I select Clone to Template, which means create a template. I give it a name, such as Accounting Server Template. Specify it will be installed on Data Center 1, followed by Next. Specify the ESXi host it will be installed on, followed by Next. Specify the disk format, thin format or thin provisioned. If I make it thin provisioned, it initially takes up less space on the data store, followed by Next. I will click on Finish, and I've now created the template. Let's now view the template by browsing the data store. Right now I am in Host and Clusters view. Let's click on Inventory, and under Inventory, let's select VMs and Templates view. We can see there's the accounting server and there's the accounting server template that we just made. If we go over to the data store, right click select Browse Data Store, we can see this is the original accounting server with the virtual disk file of .vmdk and the virtual machine file of .vmx. And then below that we see the folder for the template we just created. We can see the virtual hard disk file name still has an extension of .vmdk, but the virtual machine template has an extension of .vmtx. So now that we've created a template, now let's create a new VM based upon the template that we just created. When we create that template, when we deploy that new VM as a template, we have to enter the variables which must be different. No two computers should have the same name. We specify the administrator password, domain membership, and very important, security identifier. So I go to the template that I want to deploy to a virtual machine, and I right click and I select Deploy Virtual Machine from this template. And I select that, and under name I give it a name. Under name I give it a name such as Accounting Server 2. We'll store it on Data Center 1, followed by next. We'll store it on this ESXi host, followed by next. We will leave the virtual disk formatting the same, which was thin provision, followed by next. Under Customize, using Customization Wizard, this is where we enter the variables whereby the original and the VM which has been deployed must be different. They got to have different computer names. So we click on Next and we type in the owner's name and organization, and actually that does not have to be a unique name, followed by Next. And then we specify the name of the operating system which is running in the VM. In this case, I will call it Accounting Server 2. Remember, no two servers should have the same name, so I shouldn't have a two-file server 1. So this is called Accounting Server 2. And another thing I could do is I could use the virtual machine name, which we've already typed in just a minute ago, what was called Accounting Server 2, followed by Next. We can enter the product key. If we have an enterprise volume license key, we don't need to. Click on Next. Then we type in the password for the administrator account, followed by Next. Time zone, typically -5 hours, Greenwich Mean Time, followed by Next. We can specify a command which we want to run the first time a user logs in. We won't, followed by Next. And then under Network Settings, if we select Typical Settings, then the guest operating system will be a DHCP client, which is something we usually want. However, if it were going to be a domain controller or a DHCP server, we would select custom settings so we could assign it a static IP address. But in this case, since it's just going to be, it's not going to be a domain controller or a DHCP server or a DNS server, it's just going to be a file server, we will select typical settings so it will be a DHCP client, followed by Next. We could leave it in the work group, but we will add it to the CCBC domain. We type in the name of the domain, the administrator name, and the domain administrator's password, followed by Next. And then generate new security ID, SID. This is probably the most important thing. Whenever you install an operating system, it generates an SID, a security identifier, a unique number which is used to differentiate that server operating system from all others. So yes, definitely click on this checkbox, generate new security identifier. Click on Next. Do we want to save these custom specifications for later use? If we do, we will type in a name for this group of specifications. I'll just call it Accounting Server Template Deployment Settings, just to save that. We click on Next. So now we're done doing the guest operating system customization. Click on Finish. And then to deploy the template, we click on Finish. And there's the Accounting Server 2 still being generated. And there we go. Now the Accounting Server 2 has been created from the template. And now we've got a new server created from that template. deploying using a custom specification. When you deploy a new VM from a template, you can enter the custom variables. You have to enter custom variables such as computer name and domain name, and you can enter the variables manually using the wizard, and that's what we just did, or you can read those parameters from a file. So let's deploy a VM from a template using a custom specification. I will take my original template, right click and select deploy virtual machine from this template. I will give it a name such as accounting server 2 followed by next, and then instead of selecting customize from the customization wizard, in which case I would type in those variables myself, I select the lower radio button that says customize using an existing customization specification which we created earlier. If I select that, then it'll read all those variables from that file into this VM which we are deploying from this template. When you deploy a VM from a template, two ways to go. One, enter the variables manually, or two, read the variables in from a file. Updating the template. If you have updates to apply to a template or to the operating system in the template, you convert the template back to a virtual machine, then install the updates, then convert the virtual machine back to a template. Now let's look at cloning a virtual machine. Cloning makes an exact copy of a virtual machine, including computer name and IP address. For example, here's when you'd want to use a clone. You plan to install new software on the guest operating system on a virtual machine, and that software might completely ruin the virtual machine and the guest operating system in it. So, to protect yourself, you want to have a copy of the original, and that copy is called a clone. Clone is an exact copy of a virtual machine. Let's do it. Here's a server called Server 2012. Right-click on Server 2012, and we will select Clone. Clone Virtual Machine. Specify a name for this virtual machine. So I will call it Windows 2012 Server Clone, stored on Data Center 1, followed by Next. Specify the ESXi host where it will be saved. Click on Next. Format, I will leave it the same as the source, followed by Next. Typically, I select this option, Do Not Customize. We don't want to customize. We don't want to change the name. Click on Next. Click on Finish. And now you can see that a clone has been created of the 2012 server. So now let's bring the clone online. So I'll go to the 2012 server clone, but first I'll make sure that the server it was cloned from is taken offline, which it is. I'll select the virtual machine console, click on the green triangle to power it on, and then it boots up to Windows 2012 server, an exact copy of the machine, virtual machine it was cloned from. Notice it has the same DNS name. Bringing a clone online. Remember, don't bring a clone online while the VM that it's been cloned from is still online. Why not? Because it'll have the same computer name, same IP address, same security identifier. Templates and clones, very similar. It's the concept of copying a virtual machine file, but with a template, you're making multiple copies of a virtual machine, but giving it different names when you do. Otherwise, it's identical. Cloning is when you're making a copy of a virtual machine, but you're not changing the machine name or security identifier. And this concludes part 1